Hello and welcome to my latest video on looping within MultiTrack. This is a new feature that was added recently and we've expanded it beyond belief, so I want to go over that with you today. Now for this demonstration I'm going to start from basics and load the plugin and show you the steps thereafter to use MultiTrack as a looper. So I'm going to start by loading an instance of MultiTrack. Now because this is a simple tutorial and I've done lots of tutorials on recording, I'm going to use pre-defined loops here. So if we open MultiTrack and expand the interface and just position that so we've got plenty of room to work with. Now one very important step when using MultiTrack is once you've loaded an instance to create a new song. Now if you notice AUM's BPM is currently 82 beats per minute. And MultiTrack's is 120, but after you create a new song it adopts the sample rate and the host tempo, and that is an extremely important step which people miss. Now as I said, I'm going to start simple and I'm going to import 3 samples from the Files app using drag and drop, and we're going to drag these into the audio pool for this song. Now for those that are new to MultiTrack, the audio pool is just a location where all recorded clips end up, and we can actually import and reuse these clips even when you delete them from the timeline. So let's start by opening the Files app from the side, and then I'm going to open the audio pool and we're going to drag and drop 3 files from the Files app directly into the audio pool. And as part of this drag drop process they are converted to the correct sample rate, that being the same sample rate as AUM. Now if we select one of these files and press preview, we can ensure that they sound okay and they've imported correctly. Now I want to drag these 3 files onto the timeline. Again, we're just dragging straight out the audio pool and just adding them one after another. Now for this example we're going to use a special new feature called remote mode, and remote mode is a kind of a looping mode specifically enhanced for this new version of MultiTrack. Now if I press play on the host you'll see that nothing happens with MultiTrack because neither host sync or remote are enabled. Now in this case we want to enable the remote option for looping. Now this mode was traditionally added so that the host transport can start and stop MultiTrack, but its timeline can run independently. And if I press the play here now you'll see that MultiTrack starts to play, but it is an independent timeline, so it doesn't run in sync with AUM in remote mode. Now the great thing about that is we can remotely start and stop MultiTrack and have loops running independent of the host's timeline. Now if you don't want that to happen you can hold down on the remote button and turn remote transport control off, and when it's off the host timeline has no bearing on MultiTrack, so it can run completely independently. So which method you use depends on your application. Okay, so let's have a look at looping. So the plan here is to split the timeline into a number of sections which are going to be looped by remotely triggering via MIDI information. Now although I've only got 1 track here, we could have up to 8, which can be quite useful. So if we drag an area on the ruler and tap and hold the remote button, you'll get this little dialog pop up. If we hit the camera snapshot button and then one of the 1 to 12 slots, it stores that snapshot in that slot. Now I'm going to continue and add a snapshot for each of these 3 WAV files we imported. Although technically it can be anywhere, it could be part of a WAV file. It can be part of the timeline. But try and stick to selecting whole bars of data to define these snapshots. Now if I zoom out here I can demonstrate. If I press C3, C#3 and D, they correspond to those 3 loop points we set up, and that whole octave from C3 upwards defines those 12 snapshots. Now you could also define a snapshot without a loop, so if I double tap the loop to remove it, position the cursor on that last WAV file, and we'll just snapshot that into snapshot 4. And as I flick around those loop points now you'll see that 4th loop point is just a pointer If we start playback from there, it doesn't loop, it just continues linearly across that timeline. Now, as you can see, when I press C3, C#3 and D3, it positioned and cued those loops. But if we turn on the host transport and press, say, C3, MultiTrack will start playback once the AUM transport hits the next measure. Now, MultiTrack will keep looping this section unless I schedule another clip. So let's press D to schedule the third clip. And now I'm going to press C3 to go back to the initial clip when this clip completes. And finally I'm going to press B2 to do a synchronized stop. So that is the simplest form of loop scheduling, and that was available in the previous version. But this version introduces so much more. So let's take a look at trigger mode. Now, trigger mode works by changing to the sample immediately rather than waiting for the next beat, but it only works while the transport is currently running. So for this example, I'm going to enable remote transport control so that when I start playback in AUM, it immediately starts my loop. So I'm going to let this section loop once, and then I'm going to schedule the second clip by pressing C#3. So once the loop is playing, I can use notes in a range of C4 upwards to do immediate triggers. So I'm sure you get the idea of trigger mode. It can create all those staccato type re-triggering effects, but they have to be on the beat, so probably send them from a sequencer or something, the notes. So let's move on to the next two modes. Now, one-shot mode is a new feature added to this version, and in one-shot mode the loop plays once and then stops. So notes in a range C5 to B6 trigger these loop points in one-shot mode. Now, it's worth pointing out this is a schedule mode, but because the host transport wasn't running, it immediately started playback when I pressed a key. But if I start AUM's transport going first and then press a key, it will get scheduled at the next measure. And of course you can seamlessly chain one-shots together, and playback will stop once the last one shot has done a full cycle. Now, C6 to B7 is one shot trigger mode. I'm going to demonstrate that now. In other words, it functions like the traditional trigger mode, only it stops once the loop is complete. And that brings us to our final mode, gate mode. And this mode simply triggers a snapshot and plays while the key is held. So I think you can see what's going on there, and that gives a lot of scope for triggered things start and stop with a single note from a DAW. So now I'm going to turn my hand to some of the additional stuff like Synchro Stop that we touched upon earlier. So as you can see from that, every time I press the B2 key, it synchronises a stop at the next measure. Another feature is the ability to remove a loop and return to linear play, and you do that using A#2, and if I press that key you can see the loop point has gone and playback will just continue in a linear fashion. So that brings us to the final section, which is track mutes, and that can be done using the keys from C2 upwards, the first 8 keys. Now with AUM, where you press on the key depends on the velocity, so if I click at the bottom of the key, C1, you'll see that the mute is enabled. If you click at the top of the key, it disables, and so on. So you can use that whole 8 keys from C2 upwards to mute and unmute tracks on the fly. Anything over 90 is considered a high velocity. So that's just about it for my looping mode multi-track tutorial. Hopefully you found that interesting and informative. If you did, give it a like and thumbs up, and I'll see you next time.